Once upon a time, long ago, there was a king in Ireland. Ireland had lots of small kingdoms in those days. The king's kingdom was one among many, and not a particularly glorious one. Both king and kingdom were in fact quite ordinary, and nobody paid much attention to either king or his reign. One day the king received a huge, beautiful diamond from a relative who had died. It was the largest diamond anyone had ever seen, and it dazzled everyone. The other kings began to pay attention to him suddenly, for if he had a diamond like this, he must surely be a special king. The people too came from far and wide to see the diamond. Thus increased the sense of the importance of the king and his kingdom. The king had the diamond on constant display in a glass box, so that all who wished could come see and come and admire it. Of course, armed guards kept a constant vigil. Both king and kingdom prospered, and the king attributed all his good fortune to the diamond. One day a nervous guard asked to see him. The guard was visibly shaken. He told the king the terrible news. The diamond had developed a flaw, a crack right down the middle. The king was horrified, ran to the glass box to see for himself, only to discover that indeed it was true. It was bad news. The diamond was flawed, and terribly flawed. He called all the jewelers in the land to ask for their advice, but they gave him only bad news. The flaw was so deep that if they were to try and sand it down, they would grind it to practically nothing. And if they tried to split it into two small, still substantial stones, it might easily shatter into 1,000,000 fragments. As the king was pondering these horrible alternatives, an old jeweler who had arrived late came and asked him, "If you will give me a week with that diamond, I can fix it." The king did not believe him at first because the other jewelers were so sure that it could not be fixed, but the old man was insistent. Finally the king relented, but said that he would not let the diamond out of his castle. The old man said that that would be all right. He could work there. The guards could stand outside the room where he was working, but no one needed to interfere with his work. The king, having no better solution, agreed to let him do his work. For a week he and the guards hovered about, hearing scratching, gentle pounding, grinding. They wondered what he was doing and what would happen if the old man were tricking them. Finally, the week was up. The old man came out of the room, and the king and the guards rushed in to see his work. And the king burst into tears of joy. You see, the old man had improved the diamond. He had carved a perfect rose on the top of it. And the crack that ran down inside was now the stem of the rose. When the Irish tell the story, they say it is the way that God works with us. It is the way that God heals us. It is the way that God comes alongside us. It is the way that God transforms us. It is the way that God treasures us. It is the way that God renews us. It is the way that God beautifies us. God takes our deepest flaw and turns it into something remarkably beautiful. Such is the gift of the gospel. Such is the gift of God's engagement with us. Such is the gift of God's invitation to us. You see, we all look at the world in a way that proves skewed. All of us have a specific set of glasses with which we look at reality. All of us have a tendency to interpret reality through our own lived experience. Over these coming months, we will hear portions of Jesus' parables, and we will hear an invitation that is neither immediate nor obvious, an invitation that at times is askew and comes alongside us, an invitation that in many ways is a whisper. It will be a gentle invitation. You do not need to respond. Such is the way of Jesus. Such is the way of the parables. God will not force himself upon us like that old man in that remarkable story. He will work gently with us, but only if we cooperate with grace, only if we cooperate with life, only if we cooperate with love. There is no obligation. God's love is free. God's invitation is extended no matter where we find ourselves along the way. God's invitation comes to us through stories and signs and symbols and the renewing of our imagination. And so today we begin that journey by recognizing the gift of who we are. As we bring ourselves to who God is, we sense indeed an invitation. We hear in turn a whisper. You see, as we come to the parables that are before us in Mark and Matthew's Gospel, we are invited to the renewed gift of imagination. You see, Scripture is not only text, but also window. Scripture is not only words, but also symbol. Scripture is not only what is immediately obvious, but also what is between the lines. Scripture is the constant invitation into an ongoing conversation, dynamic relationship, and transformation in the presence of God. It's not only to look at, but to look through. Like these glorious windows that give us an indication of the beauty that is not only present in the window itself, there is also the invitation to look at the story that is being told. Mark's Gospel is an invitation to a story we know well, the feeding of the multitude. It is also an invitation to read again and again and to ponder and to be deliberate about the phrases and to allow words to sink into who we are, to hear the invitations, to rest a while, to acknowledge the frenzy of the disciples, that they had no leisure to eat, that life is often difficult, challenging, demanding, that to be those who imagine what it means, and surely we can, because we live in such a world of being sheep without a shepherd. We are probably at the heightened sense of criticism of leadership. Maybe as we journey into the 21st century, it will be inevitably the end of leadership as we know it. Maybe no one now with access to Twitter, to Facebook, to internet, to immediate and spontaneous criticism will ever be able to appreciate leadership and authority in the same way. Strap yourselves up, as they say. The 21st century is going to be one hell of a ride. Such is the invitation of Jesus. How many people seem frenzied, sheep without a shepherd, in a lonely place, isolated and anxious, cut off from community, isolated as individuals, bobbing like corks upon an ocean. Surely all of us can hear an invitation to green grass, to hearing the word that leads to life, to hearing the invitation to imagination, to dwelling with Scripture, to dwelling with sign and symbol, just as we have done in this moment of baptism. Water, life, celebration, affirmation, grace, commitment, promise, joy. Such are the gifts of the Christian gospel. Such are the gifts of God's invitation. It is offered to each one of us. You see, secondly, in Matthew's gospel, there really are only two possible visions of the world. It seems strange that Jesus would remind us of the tension between God and money. Why make this choice between God and money and not maybe God and sex? Surely the church's fascination with sexuality, its bid to control it, its bid to manage it, and times even to micromanage it, comes to the fore. There is a sense in which sex is often seen as taboo, not spoken about, or needing to be controlled. Surely Jesus would be fascinated with human sexuality, but less so. Maybe God and pleasure. Surely, as the old adage goes, there's nothing worse to do with your life than follow Jesus. That if you put your hand up for Jesus, he's going to spoil the fun for you for the rest of your lives. That there is absolutely no way you can experience pleasure in the presence of God. Surely, if you are going to commit yourself to a life of the church, you're going to be bored out of your skulls, your friendships are going is transformed by life. Such is the way of Jesus. Buckle yourselves up. In the company of Jesus, there can be many things, but boredom is not one of them. Not God and pleasure. God and pleasure go together. God is the one who creates all the things good. And God longs for us to experience life in its abundance, and its fullness, and its freedom. Maybe God in power. Surely, the way people go on and on and on about power, someone else is making decisions for me. Someone else is controlling my life. It's someone else to blame. If only the people in power could be swapped by another group of people in power, who had less power, but still enough power to get things done. It never happens that way. Has this final election, this last one, has just proved to us there is a sense in which there is always chaos in power. The human tendency is to diminish power, to try and control those with power, and to render them in many ways powerless, or at least ineffective, and then still to complain. It's wonderful being human. But Jesus doesn't compare God and power, but rather God and money. Because you see, there are only two ways of looking at the world. Either there is enough, or there isn't. Either you live with a sense of abundance and freedom and generosity, or you live a life of stinginess and self-centeredness and self-absorption. It is absolutely criminal that the vast majority of the world's resources are quite literally in the hands of a few. But it is understandable, because people always sense themselves in a place of scarcity. Rockefeller, when asked how much money would be enough, is reputed to have said, $1 million more. You see, no matter how much you got, if you're living from a place of scarcity, it's never, ever enough. Another pound will do, another 10, another 20, another 50. Jesus says you cannot serve both God and money, for either you will love the one and hate the other. There is a sense in which we have to live from a place of abundance. And it is only from that place of freedom, of sharing, of delight, of security, of being held, of being embraced, of being loved, of knowing that there is enough love to go around, that you can truly share. When I became a Christian, I had a bit of money in the bank. I like money. I like money a lot. I wanted to be an accountant, because I'm not a lover of money. I just like it a lot. I wanted to be an accountant. And I got on my knees, and Jesus said, what about that money? And I said, I can't hear you. Speak up. I'll get to it tomorrow. And on the second day, I got down on my knees, and Jesus said, let's have a conversation about that money. And I said, look, let's talk about other things. Let's talk about my parents, and Auntie Agatha, and all the poor people in Ethiopia. Let's not talk about money. And on the third day, I got the message. Eventually, Jesus said, I can't have another conversation with you until we talk about that money. And I gave that money away. I didn't give it away with enthusiasm, because I like money a lot. I was still an accountant. We really like money a lot. But I gave it away. And I was invited into a journey that quite literally transformed my life. It's not like I like money any less now. Don't misunderstand me. And if you are ever tempted to give me money, just give it to me. And Jesus can continue that conversation. But it did help me understand and appreciate an important truth. There's either enough or there isn't. The parables of Jesus say there's enough. Give it away, because in giving it away, you will find your life. You will find, as one person told me this week, when I gave my heart and life to God, even a simple daffodil looked different. I noticed things. This remarkable parable in Matthew's Gospel says, look up, look around you, absorb, engage, delight. There is enough. And finally, this morning, parables invite us into health and wholeness. There's a fancy word for that in the Bible. It's called salvation. Salvation at times seems to be a little bit like signing a decision card somewhere, putting your hand up for Jesus. It's so much more than that. It's really being invited into a community. It's being invited into a church. It's being invited into the waters of baptism. It's being invited into new beginnings. It's being invited into a conversation. It's being invited into a story. It's being invited into a dance. It's being invited into a joy. None of us have it all together. None of us, ever. That's why we are church. We come together because we hear week in and week out an invitation. And Jesus' parables are deeply respectful. He won't force himself upon us. He never does. Like that conversation he had with me all those years ago, he simply says, let's talk. And as that old BT advert from the 90s used to have it, it's good to talk. So the parables invite us into that conversation. That conversation about healing, about life, about wholeness. They come at their own pace. They don't force themselves upon us. They invite us into a life that was captured in that hymn of trust and rest and receptivity and listening. They come in a deliberate and compassionate way. They recognize who we are. And like that diamond, that at times when we notice the flaw and we say the thing is broke, I've made too many bad decisions. At times when we see that flaw and we say, I'd rather cover it up, I'd rather pretend to be someone else, I'd rather hide behind a mask. Jesus, like that old man, says, come with me to a quiet place. Rest a while. Let's talk. Let me gently chisel away. And who knows, over time, you might be surprised, just like the Irish word. And you'll find indeed